Today we're going to be doing a deep dive of the Carlos Alcaraz forehand. And before we get too deep in this analysis, I want to ask you your opinion out there. Does his forehand have the potential to be the best forehand ever? I actually say yes. When we compare him to the GOATs, which a lot of people are already doing, you look at his forehand and it's got the ingredients, like the perfect ingredients of the GOATs. If you look at his forehand, it's very similar setup to Roger, which we'll be taking a look at. If you look at the heaviness of his ball, at times, it could, like Rafa right there, he's got the Rafa follow through. At times, it's Rafa-like with how heavy the ball is. And if you look at the safety of his shot, it can remind you of Djokovic at times. Yet he's able to take offense whenever he wants and really push his opponents around. So we're going to take a look at his forehand. Let me know your comments below, what you think of his forehand, and let's dive into this video. Okay, so let's take a look at Alcaraz's setup, which a lot of people have compared to Federer's setup. And you can see that when he gets ready, he's got that initial move where he's pushing the racket to the outside here. And he's holding on to the racket with the non-dominant hand. And he's in the semi-western grip, which is a little bit different than Federer. Now he comes down and does what a lot of people refer to as the pat the dog position. But if you watch Federer, which we'll watch in a second, Alcaraz keeps his racket a little higher and a little more facing up, as we'll see. But again, it's pretty similar. Uses that offhand, not quite as straight out. And also, one thing that's interesting is he faces his palm to the back. A little different. Doesn't really make much of a difference in the hitting. So again, this is very similar to Roger. The stance is also very similar. Set up in that semi-open position, ready to hit the ball. And then goes into that wrist lag position. And as we can see, now his racket butt is facing towards that tennis ball. Very, very similar to Roger. And then probably most notably when he hits the ball, he's got that straight arm at contact. And also the way his back is positioned, the way he's rotating through this, we're going to notice is very similar to Roger. And then he tucks his opposite arm into his chest. Again, very similar to Roger and Rafa when he hits. The big difference, though, is where the ball goes after he hits the ball. This is a lot higher over the net than Roger. So let me just get this actually so we can just make it a little more clear. So this is where, again, I think you got a little bit of an advantage if you're Alcaraz, is the ball is higher and heavier. Roger tends to hit through the ball and lower over the court, taking on more risk, and therefore maybe you can hit a little more winners. But when you look at Alcaraz's forehand, it's certainly not short on firepower and being able to hit winners from all positions of the court, and I think it's got more safety. So this is where I think the forehand long-term can end up being more effective than Roger, because he can pull a winner whenever he wants, but he also chooses to play with more safety. I've seen Roger hit higher and heavier before, but he doesn't like to do it for too long. Okay, so here's Roger's setup, and his grip is different. He's in an Eastern grip. Alcaraz in a semi-Western grip, which is typically going to give you more spin. The camera angle is a little different for this particular shot, so it's you might see a little bit of difference in angles, okay, particularly the way we're seeing Roger's strings here. But a lot of similarities as far as their elbow position, holding on to the racket, and then most notably, which Roger really started to make very popular, is bringing his racket here to the outside. And like I was saying before, he just commits much more to that pat the dog position where he's really brings his racket pretty low before he starts to then flex and go into that wrist lag position there. Also, he really stretches that arm out, which I love as a habit to really create your space from the ball. Now we can see this is going to start to look very similar to what Alcaraz is doing with coming here, again, wrist now out to the tennis ball, connected with the tennis ball, laying it back, and then approaching the ball. And then as we watch that hit, very, very straight-armed as he's hitting the ball. And the back is in a similar position. He's tucking in with the opposite arm, as does Rafa, and then comes and follows through. And another thing I love that Federer does is the way he looks for that racket with his opposite hand. Just a really great habit to get into. But as we can see, that's a similar thing to what Alcaraz does, and so I see how people are saying it looks pretty similar, but we could see that their stroke is actually quite different as far as the way they're attacking the court. Like I said, Roger is always going lower and through the court for the most part, and Alcaraz playing with a lot more margin. Now we're going to get ready to compare Alcaraz's forehand to Rafa, so I want you to take a look at it one more time. We can see that the setup, there's some similarities, but it does look quite different. As look how he's getting set. Again, a lot more like Federer, but he has that height on the ball, but most of the time he is going to choose to follow through over the shoulder. He definitely does some buggy whip forehands like Rafa, but the majority of his forehands are coming over the shoulder, which allows him, I think, to easier transition and hit the ball from going higher and heavier, and then also going lower over the net with more ease. And the ball might have a little more weight into it because he doesn't pull off the shot as much as Rafa. So let's take a look at Rafa now and see how he hits the majority of his forehands. Okay, so one thing that I find interesting about the Rafa forehand is the way that he flexes his racket up. Okay, he's got almost like a V shape in his first move, and he faces the strings up, definitely more than Alcaraz and Federer. So definitely a little unique. The setup's more, there's some more unique things going on. Now, as he comes here, he gets set up, again, kind of similar to Alcaraz and Federer, how he comes here to that pat the dog position. I think he pushes his elbow a little further back, almost to the opposite side of the body. Well, you can see it is, kind of past his midsection towards his back. Kind of interesting. I think this is what creates that crazy wrist lag, which is just insane, as you're going to see. And then he's got a very straight arm, but again, kind of more than, instead of being like out there to the side, straight. Let me get some straight, drawing tools. So, Federer, Alcaraz more out there. He's kind of coming back more. So that's a little different. So you can see stylistically they're a little different. And then when he comes here, I don't think I've ever seen anybody go back as far, look at that crazy wrist lag. So we can see that this is a little bit different. And then, of course, you got to note, which might give Rafa the advantage for the most, deadly forehand ever, so he gets to take, as a lefty, he gets to take all his forehands naturally to people's backhands. So don't forget that when we really think about, what's the most deadly forehand of all time. But again, we can see the wrist laid back, headed towards the tennis ball. And then what these guys have in common, Alcaraz, Federer, and Nadal, is they've got that arm completely straight on contact, and they tuck that opposite arm in there. And so that's very, very similar when they're hitting. The strings are closing right away after the ball is gone. And then, but here's how Rafa, which is his patented shot, how he lassos over his head, the buggy whip finish, which is adding all kinds of spin. But as we see, when Rafa's hitting, a lot of times he likes to, almost be really leaning almost backwards as he's hitting the ball, really lifting it. So his margin is even higher over the net, safe over the net, bigger spin, but hard to just hit winners all day. I think Alcaraz, for the most part, he's more going forward to the ball, falling through over his shoulder. That allows him to easier pull off winners on a more consistent basis than Rafa. But again, Rafa gets to hit these forehands to the backhand all the time. So, comment below. Let me know again what you guys are thinking as far as when we're just talking about the forehand as a weapon. Who has the ultimate forehand, in your opinion, out of everybody that we're watching in this video? Okay, finally, let's compare Djokovic's forehand to Alcaraz's forehand. So we can see that all the pros, when they're getting ready, they like to hold on to the throw of the racket with that first move, that the racket, right, is above the wrist. So the racket tip is above the wrist, facing up. So that's all similar. Now, Djokovic, I think more than all the other pros, he really faces those strings back towards the fence, saying hello to the fence there with his strings. And then also, he does not bring his racket out to the side as much as Nadal and Federer and Alcaraz. It comes back more. He kind of, again, is doing a pat the dog position, but it comes almost back even, pointing, again, now the racket tip is kind of pointing back towards us to the fence, okay, instead of more out to the side. So a little different, so it doesn't look like he gets as much wrist lag into that. He uses his offhand out there addressing the ball. Again, not as extreme as Roger, and doesn't pull it back like Rafa was. And then when he comes to hit, okay, we can see the wrist still lags back there. He hits. But here's, I think, the biggest difference compared to what we've been looking at all day is his arm is bent when he hits his forehand. Okay, so he's got what you call a bent arm forehand. Not much bend. Barely any bend in there, but it's there. And then he's coming through and catching the racket. And if you watch Novak play again, he's got more margin in his game than Roger. I think it's one of the things that Roger struggles when he plays Novak and when he plays Rafa, is they have more margin. And when you watch Carlos play, I think he's like in between Djokovic. It's higher over the net than Djokovic, it looks like lots of times, but not as high as Rafa. He can hit winners from anywhere. So let me know what you think after watching all these GOATs, and then somebody who is trying to be anointed, the next one to the throne is Carlos, perhaps. And maybe could he end up being, it looks like his game to me is more developed than all, and I'm not trying to put any disrespect on the GOATs, but it looks like his game might already be more developed at 18 than where the GOATs were at 18. Let me know what you guys think. Comment below. Really interested to hear your thoughts, and subscribe so you don't miss my next video.